Hello and welcome to the RTÉ Soccer Podcast. I'm Anthony Pyne and I'm very happy to be joined this week by Paul, Corry and David Sneyd to reflect on another eventful week in the domestic game. Lots to get through. We could have a 4 hour special purely on the week St. Pat's have just had, to be honest. But let's start with Monday night's top of the table clash between Shelbourne and Derry City. 0-0. Shels remain 3 points clear of Derry at the summit with a game in hand. And yet, Paul, it sort of felt like a missed opportunity for Shels and maybe compounded by the news that broke this morning that they are losing or have lost Will Jarvis. He's gone back to Hull City, which is a massive blow as well.
Yeah, it certainly is, Anthony. And I mean, so much of what Shels do going forward seems to go through Jarvis, and that was very much the case last night when Derry went down to 10 men. It was almost like an expectancy. You give the ball to him and see if you can create or see if you can go past someone and or create a moment of magic to carve a team open. And that has been consistent with a lot of what Shels have done throughout the season. Shels are very much set up to be a counter-attacking team and transition when teams are in possession of the ball, and he is so good at being a potent threat in the final third. He's got great pace, great legs, really good at going by players inside, outside, has contributed so many goals to that Shels team. I mean, Shels in general don't score a huge amount of goals. I think it's 24 in the league so far. 8 of them are for Jarvis. So taking those goals out alone is going to leave a massive, massive void for Shels and Damien Duff to fill. And it's not really surprising that Hull have brought him back because his form has been so good. You can certainly see him going into that whole team and making an impact. So a huge loss to Shels. I mean, they have recruited quite well, bringing in the likes of Ali Cool. I thought he made a decent impact last night when he came on. They've obviously got Tulloch as well, who can play in wide areas, but I'm not sure they're going to be able to hit the level that Jarvis has to date. So a massive loss for Shels, and it's going to leave a big, big void.
David, you were there. You were at Tolka for the 42 last night. You have the line in your report that was the sixth game in a row that these teams have drawn, so we probably shouldn't be too surprised. But what was your take on it? Because there was, if you looked at the atmosphere before kickoff, and it's there's such a great energy around Tolka Park, but the
Mm.
performance itself was quite flat. Do you think Shells are maybe becoming affected by the pressure of I guess we're coming towards the run in now, or was it just one of those nights where it didn't quite happen for them?
I think the latter. I don't think you can say just yet whether or not it's the thing of a run in getting to them. That'll kind of become clearer maybe as the weeks go on over the next little while, especially now, obviously with Jarvis gone, which is as Paul mentioned, it's a major blow for them. Like after the Zurich game on Thursday, it was at that game, and Duff again said he kind of obviously we're talking about the Derry game as a bit of a preview, and obviously referencing the cup final a couple of years ago. And he said, listen, at that point, we were ahead of where we were as a team. We weren't ready as a club or as a team. He said it himself, he wasn't ready as a manager to go and actually win that trophy. But he said, but they're ready to win the league now. So obviously afterwards, then you're thinking, well, are they really? Do you know what I mean? That's the nature of both. Like they're still in an extremely strong situation. It's the sort of game. So I suppose it'd be different if Shels had a looked head and shoulders above Derry in previous games this season when they played, or there was games where they were kind of cutting them open, or it was a totally different performance. But this felt, other than maybe at times when they did look a little bit nervous and maybe had not enough energy about them, this kind of felt a bit par for the course. Like they did struggle to maybe break, well, not maybe, they struggled to create any kind of chance other than I'm trying to think of a Hardy Wood shot from long distance in the second half. And there was a moment in the second half as well when I think it was Q flashed across a ball across the face of goal. Other than that, like they didn't really create, and Derry looked extremely comfortable. So like I don't think you can almost read too much into what happened last night, because it's kind of like you'd say, well, you know what, that's you expect those type of nights for the Shelbourne. It's gonna be what happens now going into the run in. Well, how do you cope with it then? When maybe there could be times when say Derry put a bit of pressure on, if they I know that their game in hand is Bows away. Like Bows haven't won at home since April time around then, like so like, and they've got a decent enough record there, Shells as well. They've had a couple of good results there. So I think it's too early to be saying, oh, Like, remember that famous thing Rafa Benitez about cracking up and all the rest of it in the title race? It's far too early to be saying that, but it's as the weeks go on, it's going to be a major test now for them, especially without Jarvis, because I know they still have a couple of weeks maybe to try and bring, if they did want to bring fresh blood in of any players who are out of contract. But it's going to be extremely difficult for anybody to come in and be able to make an immediate impact and fill the void left by Jarvis, you know.
Yeah, they drew 15 games last season, Shells, 9 so far this season, and draws you would think leave the door open for someone like Shamrock Rovers if they can stitch together a few, you
But
know.
do you think Rovers are good enough? I don't think Rovers have it in them to do what they've done
This is the
previously and actually
question, yeah.
go and, like, especially with Europe.
Mm.
I do think Derry are still the best place. Like, Rudy Higgins said afterwards that, you know, you can't write Shamrock Rovers off. Damien Duff said it even before the game, you can't. But I don't mind. I just, on the basis of what's happened this season, I just don't see Rovers being capable of doing what they've done previously, especially when Europe maybe takes a bit of a greater importance for them this year, or a possibility of maybe making it an extremely memorable season for them.
Would you go with that, Paul? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you reflect on the games that have gone so far, they've just been too inconsistent. There's been maybe little signs of hope for Shamrock Rovers fans where they've produced a really good performance or good results, but then they haven't been able to back that up consistently enough. And I think when you have that gap between themselves and Derry and Shelbourne, it doesn't feel right now like they're going to be able to make it up. That could change. You never know, Anthony. Like, sometimes when you play against greater opposition, like Sparta Prague last week, you can actually find an extra level by playing opposition like that. And I thought they looked a little bit sharper when they played Waterford the other night. But whether or not they'll be able to maintain that, I don't quite know. But they have to keep themselves, within striking distance, that if there is to be a massive drop off in performance from both Shels and Derry, that they are there to strike. But it could be a lot to handle if they were to continue within Europe, just shuffling the squad. The age of that squad is probably grown in recent years as well. The turnaround between games can be very tight, so that's going to give its own challenges. But a lot of this comes down to whether or not Shamrock Rovers can find those extra gears. They haven't been able to do consistently enough to date. If they were to find those extra gears in the kind of last round of games, they could certainly make up some of that gap. It's just whether or not they can find that performance consistently.
Yeah, let's just chat a little bit more about that game in Waterford, because it was a really important win for them. It just, I think if they had a slipped up there, that would have really been, realistically, the final nail. But they played well. They started really well, Shamrock Rovers down there, and yet they still needed. Maybe this just sums up their season so far. They still needed that late goal from Graham Burke, David. Like, did we see the same sort of inconsistencies that sort of plagued their league campaign within that match? Really good in spells, and then just let the opposition team back into it with a sort of soft enough goal.
Like, I know it's really cruel to say it, and it's not the sole reason, but the most consistent part of that game was what happened with the goalkeeper. Like, let's be honest, like, it's bad to say it, but you see it, especially when you're at games and there's no getting away from it. And, like, maybe people at Rovers, I know, will say differently, and they will be together and all, but you can just see with sometimes reactions with defenders when stuff happens with the goalkeeper that it's an issue. Like, you just can't get away from it. Like, that's a goal that shouldn't have been conceded, that equaliser. Do you know what I mean? Like, just the judge, and it's basic. I gotta be honest. Again, I will defer to Paul on that in terms of what you would expect. That's not a mistake any professional goalkeeper should be making in terms of basic judgment. Just understanding the flight of the ball and knowing what we're doing, and that's it's not the sole reason for what's happened this season, because there are other issues. But you see it with certain moments at games when you're at Rovers match and stuff happens, and it's not always like big things. It can be just little small things in the game that happen, like where maybe sometimes they're expecting the goalkeeper maybe to show, even make an angle for a pass, or even be a bit more proactive with certain stuff, or understanding in certain moments. And it's yeah. It maybe sounds bad to maybe to hone in on it, but it's so pronounced when you see stuff happening in games that it has been one of the constants of the season.
Yeah, and even on that, like, Leon pulls off a really good save later on in that game, but it probably gets, pushed to the side because people are going to focus on the mistake that has happened. And I'd absolutely agree with that. You can see that there's more uncertainty between that back three and goalkeeper this season than there has in any campaign gone by when Alan Manus was in goal. And I would be very surprised if Shamrock Rovers didn't bring somebody in the off season to at least challenge Leon for that position, or bring somebody in who's going to take that kind of number one position, because there's like goals change the momentum of games so much. And if Shamrock Rovers continue at 1-0 and then nick a second, it becomes a far easier, last 20, 25 minutes. But there's been a couple of instances this season where not always Leon, and it's sometimes been the back three, but mistakes and concessions of goals have really cost Shamrock Rovers big points. And it has hampered them hugely throughout this campaign. So I wouldn't pinpoint it all on Leon. Yes, there's definitely moments, and Friday night was one of them. When he comes, he should absolutely not come into that space. Really sloppy goal to give away, but it has been something that has happened too many times now. And I'm sure Stephen Bradley, Steve McPhail, and the people who are in charge of recruitment will probably look to identify to bring somebody in to at least rival Leon, if not take that position next season.
Even, and just on that, even with the defence, and going back, talking about Shelbourne and Will Jarvis, going back to the very start of the season, the first month or two of it, when Shels won at Tolka Park, and Stephen Bradley came out very strongly saying it was one of probably the worst defensive display he's seen from a back three, and he was going to pinpoint. And obviously Daniel Cleary, I think he might have even been hooked in the game as well, just saying how poor you are. And that has just festered, you know what I mean? And maybe sometimes, like, the fact that, I know obviously Pico Lopez, maybe he kind of came back and was maybe struggling for form a little bit. He hasn't been at the exact same level, because they've set a standard over the last couple of years, especially defensively, that you just kind of what you expect from them. Lee Grace, he's been, over the last 4 or 5 years, probably one of the most consistent, has been one of the consistent defenders, especially on that side. And again, he's kind of been in and out. They haven't been able to get that consistency. Like Sean Harvey, remember back in the last season, I don't think Sean Harper really kicked the ball for Rovers for the last 2 months of last season. And now, like, he's been crucial to them for this year. It genuinely looked as if he would have been on the way out at Rovers. So that adds to it. But that's as well maybe when you need to have that figurehead of that goalkeeper then as well. There is just no getting away from it. And then even in the game, as you're saying, like, they get themselves into a strong situation, and that's part of the reason why they've struggled as a whole, because teams know there is that vulnerability. Like, they had it at times last year, and then back end of the season, probably after the European campaign, which wasn't great for them, that's when they kicked on in the league. The point Paul made earlier about when you play in Europe and against a different level of team, it brings more out of it. That's actually kind of happened with Pats and Derry in the last couple of years. Pats going back to CSK Sofia a couple of years ago when Tim Clancy was the manager, and then they go on and have a great end to the season. And then Derry City as well last year, when they do so well in Europe, and then again they just fall out of contention towards the end. That's what Rovers will be hoping for. But on the whole, going back to the original point, they've just not shown that consistency at the top end at the pitch to say, well, yeah, they'll be able to blitz teams, and then they still have that vulnerability at the other end, which will always give teams a chance against them.
I think to the game itself, Anthony, though, I think it was a huge win for Rovers. Just to continue momentum, they'll absolutely be looking at the Conference League and getting to the group stages of that. And I think in the league games in between, it's important that you maintain a level of performance and try win and grind out wins as much as you possibly can. So it was a huge win for Stephen Bradley. He was delighted to see Corry O'Sullivan come in and score in the first half. Like, he's had to be really patient to wait for his opportunity. They're obviously stacked with so many options top end of the pitch. His intelligence to drift from out wide into that little pocket, it's a lovely reverse ball by Nugent into him, and a super finish. And then for the second, just to get yourself over the line, you couldn't have wished the ball to drop to anybody else other than Graham Burke with his left foot. So it felt like a big 3 points. I was looking at the table, I think when it was 1-1 and Shamrock Rovers were down in 6th, the goal then really swung it. And it just feels, particularly with the result last night, that they're starting to find a little bit of form, or a little bit more in their performance, just whether or not they can be consistent enough. And like I said earlier, they need to be within striking distance of Shels and Derry if they are to really fall off.
Yeah, their next 2 league games are at home to Drogheda and then Galway. Just a quick look ahead to their European game, because we will maybe touch on the wider ramifications in terms of coefficient rankings and everything, maybe when we talk a bit about Pats in a while. But this game against Celje, for second Thursday in the Europa League, they're on the champions path, Paul. So it's a great safety net and an insurance policy to have. But this is a tough game. Slovenian team who they played Dundalk a few years ago, didn't they? It's 3 or 4 years ago, and bet them well actually at that time. how do you see their prospects here? Away leg first, and then back in Tala. And of course, and
Yeah,
as I mentioned, they do. This is the Europa League, so they, even if they are beaten, they can drop. They will drop into the Conference League.
yeah, and that gives you a really good opportunity to go out and give it a right shot. I think what Stephen Bradley will do is very consistent. What he did earlier on the campaign, particularly with the first game being away from home, is try shut up shop, try be really difficult to break down, and try keep it scoreless or at least very tight, taking it back to Tala. And they did that quite well earlier on in the European campaign. I think when they do sit with those two blocks where you've kind of got your back five and then your middle two, they can be a very, very compressed unit and one that can be difficult to break down. But it's one of those situations, like when you look at Shels last week or the week before when they conceded so early against FC Zurich, you got to just keep it tight for the first 15, 20 minutes, kind of find your way into the game and maybe leverage some of the experience that they had against Sparta Prague in recent weeks of them when you get an opportunity to keep possession of the football, to do that for as long as you possibly can and to try just, feel your way into the game. It's going to be tough. I mean, they won the Slovenian league last year. They had a couple of decent results in Europe as well last year that would lead you to believe that this is a very strong outfit. It then kind of boils back to what we've been saying about Shamrock Rovers in the league. What Shamrock Rovers are we going to see? Are we going to see one that's, really firing on all cylinders and players stepping up to the occasion? Or are we going to see one where, you have those sloppy mistakes when you're trying to play out from the back, or you have moments of indecision or mistakes from some of your key players in risky areas that then gift teams opportunities and goals? If they find the levels, I think that they're going to have a real, really good shot in this tie over two legs. I really do, Anthony. There's something that feels like the European distraction might actually kind of sway in their favour, and it might just kick them up to another level. So I think they'll have a really good opportunity over the two legs. But the first leg for me is always going to be about shutting up shop, try limit the amount of chances that we have, and try bring a decent result back to Tallinn next week.
They could also, David, they could end the week back in the FAI Cup because they've appealed. This is around Dawson Devoy's availability in the game against Bowles. Bowles won that game in the Cup, but there is an appeal which will be heard on Wednesday. Devoy played in the game. He had been cleared by the FAI. He had a suspension hanging over him from when he was playing at MK Dons. He was sent off last December playing in an EFL Cup game against Brighton under 21s. That ban has to be served when a player moves on to a club not in the Football League. But the FAI, their information, the information they relayed to Bohemians was that, or the information that Bohemians were led to believe, or believed, I should say, is that the suspension had to be served in the league rather than the first competitive game. His first competitive game was, of course, in the Cup. The FAI decision was made under Rule 7.5 of their rule book, which says a suspension pending from another league shall be served in the new league. The level of football shall be determined by the disciplinary body of the new league. And that is what has left the door open for a Shamrock Rovers appeal, which would be heard, as I said, on Wednesday. I mean, I don't know if there's much more we can add to this, David. We have to, I guess, just wait and see. But it does look like there's a little bit of wriggle room for Rovers to have a case here.
Well, I think the fact is that understanding would be Rovers basically put this in because they were told you've got a case to do it. Like it wasn't like a frivolous thing where no, obviously there's the rivalry with Bows and all the rest of it, but it seems to be the legal advice that they were getting was that this is worth attempting. And that's why obviously it's gone to the appeal to the hearing, and the result will come out of it tomorrow. It's a strange one in the sense that it'll be the FAI will come out on this one way or the other. Then we have egg on their face because obviously Balls obviously were aware of the situation. They were the ones who sought the advice and they were told, yeah, you have the green light to go and do this. And then obviously since then it's come to light, well, then actually there could be an issue. So like I'll be honest, I'm not sure what genuinely to be expected of it. You would think that if it's found in Rovers' favour, well, considering that Balls got the advice and were going off the information given to them by the outfit who run the league, you would think a replay rather than a straight maybe kind of I don't know. Would I feel like swap would be the fairest thing, but we don't know what's actually going to happen until tomorrow.
Yeah, and we await with interest to see what does happen. Let's just have a quick chat then about Bowls, Paul. They drew 2-2 with Drogheda United, who are still bottom of the table, but they're still scrapping, and they're a tough game for anyone that goes down there. One of the other big news lines that broke earlier this week was Alan Reynolds has stepped away from his role as assistant, Ireland under-21 assistant to Jim Crawford. He's been there since 2020. Previously combined that role with his assistant roles at Derry and Waterford and Shels before that. But he did take a bit of criticism back in the June window when Ireland played those two under-21 friendlies against Croatia and England under-20s. It was the same week as Bowles played Derry City in the league. Now, Alan Reynolds flew back from Croatia twice that week to oversee training. Probably didn't help that Bowles then lost the game on the Sunday. But do you think that how much of an impact that week had on this decision? Because he did take a little bit of flack and it probably affected him, you'd imagine.
Oh yeah, I'm sure if he had his time back, Anthony, he probably would have made a different decision when he took the Bowes job to maybe solely focus on proceedings at Dalymount and maybe drop his responsibilities from the 21s, because it did become complicated, let's say, during that window. The optics of it were really poor. If Bowes had gone on and won against Derry, it probably would have been swept under the carpet and people would have moved on. But the fact that the performance was poor that week, the result was poor as well, and they started to slip down the table quite a bit at that period of time. There was a huge amount of frustration. I was actually in Dalymount that night from fans, and rightly so, to be honest with you. I think if you're going to dedicate yourself to the club, I think you need to be 100% in. This is, a very full-time league right now. It's not a situation where people are in one or twice a week and then focus on a game on a weekend. And I think if Alan Reynolds had his way again, he might reflect on it and maybe make a different decision. But it's cleared up now. Reduces any sort of complication coming into international windows, and I think that just makes the whole situation easier for everybody involved. And you can see the work that he's putting in there. I mean, the performance against Drogheda again the other night was decent. A lot of what they're doing is starting to knit together. They're getting themselves into really good positions, but they just don't seem to have that clinical edge at the top end of the park. Should have gone further in front at the beginning of the second half. There's a ball that drops out of McDonald. I don't know why he just doesn't put his foot through. Plays it Dale Rooney. Dale Rooney should hit it first time, reverse it again. That would have put them 3 up, I think, and you probably put the game to bed. But consistent with other weeks, they're not really ruthless in front of goal, and they don't seem to be able to put teams away and enjoy the kind of last 30-35 minutes of a game. They're always giving teams opportunities to come back into the game. That's something that they're going to have to work on. Probably going to need to sign a striker in the off season as well, because a lot of the players and a lot of the play that they have leading up to that position is actually really good. And then kind of at the other end of the pitch, you somewhat feel like they're going to give you an opportunity, and that was the case again on Friday evening, and they easily could have lost the game in kind of the last moments of the game. First of all was Foley, and then there was Piero had another really good opportunity. Casper comes out and does really well. So they're starting to take a little bit more shape. You can kind of see some of the patterns in their play. Ross Tierney's going to make a big impact as Dawson Devoy already. But they need to be better at both ends. And I think once they kind of find a bit more balance in their play in both boxes, they should pick up a few more points. But the way the league is kind of falling at the moment, they can't afford to neglect what's behind them. They got to start picking up more points and kind of focusing on what remains to the end of the season. And until they kind of do that, you're constantly looking over at Dundalk and Drogheda behind you and thinking, okay, they've started to pick up points in recent weeks. We need to create a bit of a gap between ourselves. But I can see what Alan Reynolds is doing and Stephen O'Donnell, and it is starting to take shape. The players that they brought in have certainly made a difference, but it's now about picking up more points and in particular keeping more clean sheets.
David, just a quick word on Shane Farrell, who's hit the ground running at Drogheda. Got a brilliant goal, absolutely brilliant goal, and gave him an opportunity to give a little bit back to the fans who were giving him a bit of stick about chicken rolls and eating chicken fillet rolls. It looks like he might have just found a home down there, because he is a good player. He's tenacious and aggressive, and I think they like him down there already. And it's nice to see him playing well.
Yeah, I'll be honest. What's going to happen with Shane Farrell wasn't something that I saw coming at the start of the season in terms of how his career at Shell is going to go. Because if you go back to obviously that cup final, he was one of those players that Duff wanted on the pitch because just of the mentality he seemed to have and the attitude he seemed to have. Also, maybe just at that point, the bodies they had, he was one of their better players, and he was someone who obviously the fans had a serious connection to because he'd been there for so long. But if you look back, he played him as a wing back and just had a brutal game. He wasn't fit, but he made sure he got out onto the pitch, and obviously he gets taken off at half time. And he was one of those players who you felt as if was actually relishing what Damien Duff was doing at Shelbourne. But then bit by bit, obviously that began to change. Obviously Duff came out publicly, as you're saying about the chicken roll, and kind of said it, didn't he? Where it was like at first he kind of made allowances for him and the level of professionalism maybe that he had. But then yeah, he obviously just needed to play. He wasn't getting minutes. He's one of those players who he strikes me as he needs to be playing. Like, he needs to be that player who was looked to actually go and make a difference in games. And just times that, especially last season at Shels, where he was still really, really impressive for them and was making a difference, especially even in the final third. He's, as you said, he's hit the ground running at Drogheda, and part of that has obviously come down to the fact, I think he said it himself afterwards, maybe he has a bit more freedom in the sense of, not that he was maybe obviously within the Damien Duff structure, everyone has their jobs and all the rest of it. And maybe he has been given that bit more license to go and be adventurous, because he has got that sense of adventure in him when he's playing and when he's attacking and stuff. And he could be, like Paul mentioned there, about maybe Bowes having to look behind them as well, obviously, because Dundalk are only a few points off. And I know even though he still have a couple of games, but in games when it's tight, if Drogheda can keep it tight, and if they have that player like that at the top end of a pitch who could maybe spark something by either setting up a goal or creating a moment that leads to a goal or scoring a goal, that could get them out of trouble. Do you know what I mean? And like, he is infectious. Like, I did an article with him looking ahead of last season, just chatting to him because obviously where he's from in Finglas, and like he's had an extremely, like, his background, he's an extremely tough background of what he's come through to be where he is now, and that outlook he has on life as much of anything else. And like, he spoke very openly even about how much of a help Damien Duff was. And now you just want to see that I'm actually having that in his football now as well, because he could be someone who at the end of a season could help get Drogheda out from where they were, because it did look as if they were kind of stagnating a little bit. And he is that player who can provide a spark, but also provide a spark for teammates around him, and actually give teammates around him that extra little bit of confidence, that kind of in the opposite of where maybe Rovers could be at, where you always feel as if you have a chance against you. You feel as if you've got a player like Shane Farrell doing well, that you always feel if you can just stay in the game, he might be able to help produce a moment that could get you turn 1 point or turn no point into 1 point, or 1 point into 3.
Yeah, and with it being as congested as it is at the bottom, or tight at the bottom, that could be very important indeed. Dundalk are just 2 points ahead of Drogheda in second bottom, Paul. I don't want to sort of pick out Felix Goddard. He's a young goalkeeper at Dundalk on loan from Blackburn, but he has had a bad couple of weeks. He's their fourth goalkeeper that they've used this season. George Shelby's gone, Ross Monroe, Sean Malloy have all been between the posts at various times, but it's been a rough period for him. I don't know, like with players who come to this league, like I'd imagine being a goalkeeper is particularly challenging for a young player, because the grounds are tight. There's that old-fashioned feel about them. You're going to get a lot of stick if you show any sign of weakness with your kicking or your handling, or you make an error. People are going to let you know about it. And it just looks like he's going through a bit of a learning curve at the minute.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, he's not getting helped out, Anthony, by the players around him. And I wouldn't just kind of single out the back four. Some of the mistakes that Dundalk were making over the weekend were really poor. I mean, you just have to look at the goals that they've conceded and some of the kind of key chances that Galway had to give you an understanding of where the weak spots are within Dundalk's side. The first goal comes from a Kiki just losing the ball in the middle of the pitch. It's probably a situation where you need to protect the ball with your body and ensure that you kind of retain possession of the ball. He tries to let it run across him, and Galway then, on kind of transition and taking possession of the ball, are getting at Dundalk, who are so split out across the pitch, and there just seems to be so many gaps. and it's a good header for the goal. Yes, keeper could potentially do better, but it stems from Dundalk being loose with the ball. And then you look at some of the other chances. I mean, the Jimmy Keohane miss where he hits the bar from about 2 or 3 yards out, I think that comes from a ball from Brendan Clark that gets flicked on, and Stephen Walsh is through on goal. And you kind of look at Dundalk and you think it's no coincidence that they are where they are in the league, because they just seem to be so easy to carve through. They make mistakes that lead to good chances or lead to goals, and they give themselves mountains to climb within games. So yes, it's very easy to look at Goddard and the goals that go in, but I think when you step back and you look at Dundalk as a whole, not just the back four, you look at the midfield, the way that they allow teams to carve through them has to be a big worry for John Daly. I mean, look at the second goal as well that Walsh gets. O'Sullivan seems to just kind of waltz down the right hand side, and there's no real pressure on him or attempt from Dundalk to stop the cross into the box. And for Goddard and for the likes of Andy Boyle, they're dealing with a huge amount of work that maybe most other centre halves aren't in the league. And if they don't stamp that out, Anthony, they're going to drop a huge amount of points between now and the end of the season. And don't be surprised if Drogheda are to catch them. They've certainly got players who can hurt you at the top end of the pitch, but that's absolutely no use to you when you're going to kind of concede such sloppy goals and chances to teams. And to be fair to Galway and to John Caulfield's team, they took full advantage of that. And they've really grown in confidence as the season has gone by. I think if you look at the team that started the season, how they played, they were very direct and made it very difficult for teams. I think there's a lot more in their game now than just being an ugly outfit who plays for set pieces, plays for throw-ins, and tries to make things difficult for teams. There's a lot more kind of build up, and there's a lot more interplay between some of their forward players that are creating really good chances. The likes of a Jimmy Keohane will always get you goals, as will Walsh. And defensively, they are absolutely superbly set up that they're not going to concede many chances. So Galway deserves a huge amount of credit. I think it's very easy to pinpoint individuals within Dundalk, and you look at the goalkeeper and you say, okay, maybe he's made a couple of mistakes. I think there's a bigger problem there. I think that, they are far, far too easy to play against. They're very inconsistent. And until John Daly puts a foundation in front of them and makes them difficult to beat, they are going to continue to lose games based on what they produced last week.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, as you said, there'll be a few more twists and turns in that sort of battle to avoid the bottom spot, and at least make it into the playoff, the relegation playoff promotion place. All right, let's move on now, David, to St. Pat's. This is like the EastEnders omnibus edition because we could speak.
It was which one of us is Pat Butcher?
I'm Pat Butcher and you're Frank. All right, so we'll start with the good stuff, David.
Does that mean Paul is Peggy?
The Mitchell brothers. So they got the job done in Vaduz and Liechtenstein. It was a 2-2 draw, 5-3 in aggregate. So that was that hurdle cleared. On they go into the next round of qualifying for the Europa Conference League. Although we'll chat a little bit more about some issues Stephen Kenny has about fixtures ahead of their next European game. But first, they bet Sligo 3-2, a 98-minute penalty from Brandon Kavanagh. But the penalty, David, I actually, to be honest, I think even the first penalty, when Mulroney went down under Pineacre, I thought that was outside the box. But okay, it was a marginal call. That second penalty, which was effectively the last kick of the ball, to win the game, Rob Hennessy pointed to the spot, and it was soft. I mean, it was a soft penalty. Sligo actually contacted the FAI on Monday to air their frustrations with the officiating. How soft was it? Like, is there, to play devil's advocate, there was an arm on a shoulder, which maybe gave the Patsman a chance to go down, but it still looked very, very harsh.
Oh, it wasn't a penalty. I don't see how you could give that as a penalty. I know you see people. I wasn't at the game. You see people maybe who are on the side of where it happened on the Comac, and you're maybe saying, "Oh, there might have been a bit of a tussle," but when it's actually happened and you're looking at it, and you're just like extremely soft. I could be wrong. Does the linesman flag? I don't think the linesman flagged for that either. I think it does seem to be a decision by the ref. Obviously Sligo, they released that statement, and I didn't John Russell come out as well, kind of pretty strongly afterwards as well in terms of what had happened. But
He got
It's
sent off. I mean, he got sent off after the decision was made, didn't he? John Russell got a red card for.
Yeah. So if you look at it, like between Rovers and third and Sligo and sixth, they're all level on 37 points. Like if Sligo get a point, which I think they deserve from that game, they're in third place. Now, don't get me wrong, like the nature of how condensed it is there between Sligo, Galway, Waterford, Rovers, even possibly Pats, you never know. I'd be surprised if they can they do put a push on. It's gonna be kind of back and forth for the rest of the season. But like for Sligo, like they're going for you unexpectedly. Let's be honest. I think they are challenging for Europe. They're challenging to get into a top three, possibly top four for sure. Place and a result like that would have been a huge benefit for them. Listen, it's one of them where unless you hear the referee's reasoning for why he gave the penalty, it's hard to actually say he clearly thought maybe it was the fact that Turner was with, oh, sorry, Chapman and Turner, and that he drags him or pulls him. I'll be honest, it looks at me, it's like one of those that you see 100 times in a game at that stage of it where the player, and like we were wrong, but Paul will know the dark arts of professional football is much more than me, but you chance your arm. You try your luck in the hope that maybe you might get a decision, and it went his way. And yeah, like you can understand 100% Sligo's anger, just purely not just purely, partly because of where they're at and where they find themselves in the season and what they've been doing. It's all about maintaining that momentum. And now look, like any professional footballer or manager, you're always going to want to maybe try and draw the positive. So you kind of do it. But you know what? Typical getting that decision down in Dublin, they don't want us to be qualifying. You use it as a way of maybe galvanising your players, and that's probably what it's probably the only thing Sligo can do to maybe get any kind of positive from it because he didn't get the points, and it was extremely. I just it's as I said, unless you hear the referee's decision for why he gave it, it's hard to fathom why he has given it. I'll be honest.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a bad decision, Paul. I mean, it's saying that when you see a club, we saw this in the Premier League last season, when clubs release these statements, like it's not going to change anything. Like, is there an element to them that maybe it's just pure frustration, or they maybe want to show their supporters that they
Can I
see
just
doing
can I just
something?
make just a point because it was something that sorry just because maybe it's important because I don't think it's like a pile on referees and even Rory Higgins yesterday after the Shels game, like he came out and said, listen, absolutely no complaints with Sam Todd's two yellow cards and getting sent off. It was the right decision. The frustration then what happened later on is that he's saying, well, hold on, John Martin has two very, very similar tackles, one not long afterwards in the second half, that doesn't get punished. So there's more so about that level of consistency
Yeah,
and stuff. That's what seems, and it's what grates all the time. I think everyone can take bad decisions because
yeah,
you can accept them. But you still want that level of consistency in terms of a certain thing, a certain incident that gets punished one way, but then doesn't get punished a certain way. And it's not always in terms of a penalty decision or that, but just simple things like a foul, like Sam Todd's a foul. You could see it was almost in slow motion last night. You see the turn happening from Bort about half an hour before, and you're thinking, how can this defender not see what he's going to do in the middle of the pitch? Like that's why I think there was frustration from Derry. Like you're thinking, basic cop on, this is coming a mile away. But then you see a similar incident not get punished afterwards. That's where the frustration comes from, I
yeah.
would say.
And that's a good point, Paul, because I mean that Pats penalty, we're not if you're giving that every game, there's going to be about 100 penalties from now until the end of the season.
Yeah, and it opens up a can of worms of what is and what isn't a penalty. I'm not sure there's anybody around the league now who would side with the penalty being given the other day. I think from a Sligo perspective, what you're maybe hoping for is, yes, you throw in that you feel very hard done by. Maybe you hope that you get a couple of decisions between now and the end of the season because there's no chance anything's going to be done in relation to that result or likely to the referee going forward because we probably don't have a huge amount of referees to choose from either. So can you stand some of them down? Probably not. But what you maybe hope for is that it plays in people's minds, and between now and the end of the season, if there are half decisions, maybe one or two of them go in your favour, and that's maybe what Sligo are hoping for. But you have every kind of right to stand up and make their point to the FAI about how harshly they were done by, because if you take that incident away, you leave Richmond Park with a point, you build on some really good momentum that Sligo have built up, like Davis mentioned, and you've got a real push for Europe. So yeah, it was a terrible way to end what seemed to be a really good open game as well. So it's one that I'm sure Johnny Russell and Sligo maybe won't linger too much on. It'll try to get back to kind of grinding out results that they have done in recent weeks. It wasn't too long ago we were speaking about Sligo, struggling down the bottom of the table. They have done fantastically well to turn their season around. They're now looking up. They've a good draw in the FAI Cup. They could go deep in that. They could push for Europe in the league. And focusing on that is probably the priority, and hoping that you get a couple of decisions along the way to to maybe paper over what must have been very, very hard to accept.
Yeah, they have Shels in the league next as well, as I mentioned earlier, so could potentially have a big say in how this title race turns out. As well, Sligo Rovers, they are a team in form despite that result in Shakor. Okay, David, so let's look ahead with Pats. They now have FC Saba in Europe. The first leg is this Thursday in Tala. They requested, or they are looking for the Galway United game on Sunday to be postponed, bearing in mind that their travel challenges that they're facing when they go back to Azerbaijan for the second leg. They have to go through Turkey for that game. Galway have said no, which they're entitled to do, fully entitled to do, and Stephen Kenny acknowledged that. His frustration is with the FAI, and he sort of made the wider point, David, that the FAI need to do more to help Irish clubs for the greater good. Not to get too deep into the coefficient rankings, because it would kind of melt your brain a bit. But basically, if you're in the top 33, like if you're under currently 33rd in the UEFA coefficient rankings, and that is significant because it means that your cup holders go into the Europa League. As opposed to the Conference League. So in other words, they have a safety net, and there's all sorts of ramifications with that. Money, of course, being the primary one, and the potential for extra prize money. So his point is, the FA have to help out their own clubs, and aside from, forget about whether it's Pats or Shamrock Rovers or Shelbourne, whoever it is, that maybe they should just change their thinking on this and step in and make a decision for the greater good. How do you see all of this? What's your thinking on it?
There's a couple of ones. So at the start of the season, there was also an element where fixtures were moved at the start of the season, where they were front loaded slightly to give around before Europe, where the clubs who are playing in Europe ended up playing each other a couple of times before. That's why you would have seen like Rovers played Shelbourne twice at Tolka Park before they even played them at Tallaght. So there was a kind of a bit of an agreement done on that, as far as I'm aware. I would be of the opinion that I don't think it's something you can just do on an ad hoc basis. It needs to be agreed before the season starts with all clubs and who are taking part in Europe. So at least everyone knows what the story is. So rather than just deciding on a win, because I should say, like I was saying, like Galway are thinking, well, hold on, we're playing them, but we're going for Europe. Do you know what I mean? So you could then also be denying another club the chance and the benefit of qualifying for Europe, where the money that's on offer and the prize money that's on offer is so important. It's going to be so important, and could be a game changer for what Galway could do in the short to medium term. So I can understand Stephen Kenny's frustration and maybe making a difference, but I do think it's one of those where it needs to actually be done and agreed upon at the very start of the season, rather than on an ad hoc basis, and basically said, right, teams who progress in Europe, games will be postponed in the league to give them the best possible chance. And that's agreed on beforehand, whether it's something that goes in as part of licensing at the start of a season where it's agreed on and that all clubs have to do it, or it's an agreement. That's the only way you can think it's fair at the start of the season is to do it that way. And you say, well, actually, we're doing this because we want to benefit the league as a whole. But then also, if you look at it, as I said, Galway are going for Europe this season. So for them, absolutely makes no sense for them to say, oh yeah, we'll give you a dig out, because in their heads they're thinking we've got a better chance of qualifying for Europe than you do this season. So that's my thing on it. If it was done, agreed on at the start of the season, and it was part of, I say, the licensing, and part of, I know obviously Mark Canham came out with his plan about having a team in the Champions League group stages in about 10 years or so. If it was all part of that project, people could get behind it and understand it. But on a whim and a bit of an ad hoc basis, it doesn't sit right, personally.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And I think it's something that they should maybe look at going forward. I think irrespective of whether you're traveling to Scotland or Azerbaijan, I think the teams should be given a decent space in between games to give them the best opportunity of going through. And the reason I say that is because our season starts on second or third week of February and then wraps up the first week in November. Like, there is space in the calendar to push the season out. our off season is nearly 4 months long, which is
Too long.
a huge period of time for players to be off. I think if you extended the season by 2-3 weeks, and that maybe gave the teams involved in European competitions that more of an opportunity to progress, most teams I think would be accepting of that, given that different teams that have different opportunities in different years. So there's space in the calendar to do it. I think that is maybe something, like David said, should be looked at the beginning of next season, and maybe not done on an ad hoc basis. But I think Stephen Kenny definitely has a point there.
Just before I move on from this, David, because within that story, there's some fairly sharp Stephen Kenny quotes. I'm just going to read out a couple here. He said, ultimately, the FAI board should rule on this. They can't hide behind it. Obviously, you have sporting people like Packy Bonner and also Mark Cannon as director of football. They should be part of the decision making on this. I'm sure if they were, they are probably not aware of any of this. They mightn't even know who we are playing. But basically, they should be aware of this. And that sounds like a jab, if ever I heard one.
Well, considering Packy Bonner wanted Celtic to take on a League of Ireland club, I'd say he's fairly on the money that Packy Bonner hasn't got a clue League of Ireland clubs are playing. That's my own thing. Like, I don't think I've ever seen Packy Bonner at a League of Ireland match in the last little while. Could be totally wrong there. Have you seen him, Paul? Have you been at a game where they're saying him? And I'll be honest, I've been at Tally. You know, if you're gonna go to a ground, you're gonna go to Tally because it's probably one of the better ones to be. And I haven't seen him. I've seen Mark Cannon, obviously. But yeah, no, maybe there is that element of frustration with Stephen Kenny in terms of that, and the frustration. But I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily a fight you need to be picking like that at the moment, like that. If it's one of them, I'm going back to that point where if you're saying, well, do you know what, we want to be seeing League of Ireland clubs progress, and the fact is with the Conference League, it's one of the best things that's happened for League of Ireland clubs or any small country in the last while of UEFA, because you do have a really good competition that's competitive but brings in a serious level of finance that is actually it's actually attainable. Like, we've already had Shamrock Rovers get there, but the nature of it being because of the importance of that champions path almost right off a campaign, which isn't great. So it's attainable 100% for the League of Ireland club to be getting into that Conference League. So you can see where Stephen Kenny's frustration is at. But it may be, again, I go back to that point I made earlier. If you're having that vision for what Irish football is going to be and what clubs should be buying into, you need to get everyone on board as part. If it's part, I said again, part of licensing. The FAI have strict licensing guidelines for clubs. You know what? I said this in a piece about transfers and all the rest of it. Like, they know what clubs are spending and they have to approve it. Do you know what I mean? So, like, if this is part of it going forward, where we say, well, do you know what, we want to be seeing at least one club in the group stages of the Conference League within a couple of years consistently, then that's when you make that plan, and that's how you do it. That's what I go back to. You can't just kind of the thing that's coming into my head now. The thing that's coming into my head now is the quote from, again, typically is the quote from Damien Duff before the Zurich game, saying there's a difference between having a dream and having a vision. You can lie in bed and have a dream saying you want to do this, but unless you have the vision and laying it out exactly of how it's done, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's what needs to happen here. If, like, going back to it, so like having these complaints about, you know, changing fixtures and X, Y, and Z like this, it just seems like a conversation we would have been having years ago as well. Do you know what I mean? You need to be getting away from that. And that's where you need to have that vision and that focus of saying, well, actually, these are the plans that we have in place for our teams who qualify for Europe. And no matter what happens, this is what happens with the fixtures domestically. Everyone knows the story then, and there's no issues. And then you know what you can be aiming for. That's where I see it, rather than this little, don't get me wrong, from a journalist's point of view, yeah, it's great. You have the story and it's nice to write, but you don't want to be writing about that, you know, where they're at loggerheads. There should be that ton of that almost to get togetherness, especially. Don't get me wrong, the clubs, rival fans at one club who don't want another League of Ireland club to succeed in Europe, which is totally understandable. But as a whole, for Irish football, you need to be seeing the Irish clubs progressing in Europe, because whether we like it or not, financially, it is a game changer for them.
Yeah, and we wish St. Pat's and Shamrock Rovers, look, as I said, anything that helps that coefficient is good. So a big week coming up for them. Let's just run through the FA Women's Cup first round games. They were played over the course of the weekend. Sligo Rovers won 5-0 against Terranure Rangers, who were the Amateur Cup winners, which is what qualified them for that competition. That's Sligo's first competitive win of the season. Balls had a really good 2-1 win over Peamount United at Dalymount. Their manager Ken Kieran was assistant to Kieran Kilduff when Athlone won the cup last season, so he has a bit of pedigree there. They're safely into the quarters. Shels were the beaten finalists that day, of course, against Athlone. They started their mission to put that right with a 3-1 win over Galway United. Shamrock Rovers edged a very good game in Tala against Wexford on penalties. Cork City were too strong for another team from Leaside, Douglas Hall. Cork were 9-0 winners in that match. DLR Waves got past another amateur side, Whitehall Rangers 4-0. And Treaty United bet Ferns United 9-0. Athlone get a bye into the quarters because they are the cup holders. Okay, we're going to leave it there for this week. I'd like to say thanks again to Paul Corry and to David Sneyd for joining us. We'll be back again next week. Join us then. Thank you.